Since you're watching this video, you've probably come across plenty of content about simulation theory or read something on the topic. But let me ask you, in any of those videos or articles, have you ever come across a clear and specific percentage probability of us living in a simulation? Before we dive in, if you could like this video and subscribe to our channel right now, you'd be helping us reach more people who are interested in topics like this. Your support means the world to us, and we thank you in advance. Now, let's get back to where we were. In fact, the philosopher who introduced this theory to the scientific world in 2003, Nick Bostrom, shared a formula in his paper, specifically on page 6. This formula attempts to calculate whether we might be living in a simulation, a claim that has convinced some while drawing skepticism from others. For some reason, though, we've never actually seen anyone walk through this formula in any other videos. That's why we wanted to take a closer look at it together and see what it tells us. Even better, if you'd like to perform the calculation yourself based on your own evaluations, you can find the relevant links in the description below. Of course, whether you find this calculation realistic or not is entirely up to you. However, some scientists take it quite seriously. But that's not all. Nick Bostrom's equation has inspired research that goes beyond just calculating whether we live in a simulation. It has also fueled inquiries into how many different simulations might exist. Bostrom developed a fascinating theory about the likelihood of future advanced civilizations creating ancestor simulations. According to this theory, if a civilization reaches the post-human stage, it would have a high probability of running simulations of their ancestors to better understand their past, model societal problems, or even for entertainment purposes. In that case, the world we are experiencing right now might itself be a computer simulation. Which brings us to an important question. When everything we feel is governed by our perception, does it really matter if we are in a simulation or not? Let's continue from here. Bostrom defines the post-human stage as a level where humanity transcends the limitations of the physical body. This includes the possibility of transferring consciousness into digital environments, a higher state for humanity. Bostrom's thought experiment suggests that a civilization that has reached this stage could create simulations to understand their ancestors, analyze social issues, or simply for recreation. And as a result, we might be living in one of these simulations. To be objective, it's worth noting that Bostrom's hypothesis has been heavily criticized, particularly for its reliance on the post-human concept. Some scientists argue that humanity may never reach this level, or even if it does, it might choose not to pursue such a path. In fact, we believe the possibility of it being deliberately avoided is not insignificant. But setting these critiques aside, what's the actual probability that we are living in a simulation? This is where Bostrom proposed an equation, a mathematical framework that factors in the likelihood of post-human civilizations running simulations, the total number of simulations, and the probability of humanity going extinct before reaching such a stage. Today, we'll take a closer look at this equation and explore what it might reveal about whether our reality is, in fact, a simulation. The first variable in this calculation is the probability that humanity will go extinct or destroy itself before reaching the post-human stage. This represents the likelihood of the human species failing to survive. If humanity ceases to exist, reaching the post-human stage and creating simulations becomes impossible. Therefore, the higher humanity's chances of survival, the greater the likelihood that we are living in a simulation. So, what is this probability of extinction? To estimate this, the projected timeline for humanity reaching the post-human stage becomes crucial. At this point, Dr. Hüden Ashrafian from Imperial College has suggested the year 2100 as the starting point for this stage. This prediction is based on the timeline for reaching a Kardashev Type 1 civilization. In 1970, Carl Sagan calculated that our civilization was at a 0.72 level on the Kardashev scale, and he predicted that humanity could reach Type 1 status by the year 2100, provided the energy problem is resolved. Once humanity solves its energy challenges, it would, according to Ashrafian's prediction, have the potential to transition into the post-human stage. So, what is the likelihood of humanity destroying itself by the year 2100? Different studies provide varying estimates. For instance, according to SETI, Baum's research, the probability of humanity going extinct solely due to natural disasters is estimated at 1 in 500,000 per year. Meanwhile, in Ashrafian's calculation, the probability of humanity destroying itself by 2100 is assumed to be 5%. Realistically, it's challenging to determine this probability with absolute certainty, but using such a range in our equation is feasible. Additionally, a technical report by Oxford University's Future of Humanity Institute in 2008 estimated that the chance of humanity being wiped out by nuclear war by 2100 is 1%. The same report predicted a 4% chance of extinction due to other types of weapons and a 30% probability that at least 1 billion people could die in a war by 2100. To remain conservative, we will proceed with a 50% probability in our calculations. The second key variable in calculating the probability of living in a simulation is the average number of ancestor simulations run by post-human civilizations. The more simulations they create, the higher the likelihood that we are living in one. If post-human civilizations, with their advanced technological capabilities, are able to produce a vast number of highly accurate simulations, this becomes a strong factor supporting the simulation hypothesis. Simply put, more simulations mean a greater chance of us living in one. At least, that's the foundation of Nick Bostrom's theory. According to Bostrom's paper, the computational power of post-human civilizations would theoretically allow them to generate an almost unlimited number of simulations. However, Dr. Hudin Ashrafian offers a different perspective. He suggests that even if post-humans were to create only 10 simulations, the process could still be meaningful. For our calculations, we'll adopt a more conservative approach, assuming that post-human civilizations have the resources to run only a single simulation. The third and final key variable in this calculation is the total number of humans who have lived up to the year 2100. This number not only increases the motivation to create a simulation, but also provides the necessary data for such a simulation. An increase in the number of humans leads to a greater historical dataset, which makes creating a simulation more appealing. Bostrom's formula is based precisely on this logic. For our calculation, however, we are adopting a more cautious approach by using the total number of humans who have lived up to the present day. According to an accepted study, approximately 108 billion people have lived from 50,000 BCE to the year 2023. This estimate is based on detailed research conducted by the U.S. Census Bureau. When these three core variables are combined, the mathematical foundation of the simulation hypothesis begins to take shape. This allows us to calculate the probability that the reality we are experiencing is, in fact, a simulation. While this process is both fascinating and deeply thought-provoking, we must remind ourselves that it remains purely speculative. Before diving into the details of the calculation, it's worth noting that Nick Bostrom's simulation hypothesis, praised by many for its intellectual depth and ability to provoke profound philosophical questions, has a mathematical foundation that is rarely scrutinized. To discuss this theory without first questioning its underlying structure would be quite unfortunate. And that's exactly what we're about to do. We're going to start examining that foundation. Now, on your screen, you can see the mathematical model proposed by Nick Bostrom to calculate the probability that the reality we live in is a simulation. At first glance, this formula might seem complex, but in truth, for a theory that has garnered so much attention, its underlying logic is surprisingly straightforward. You take the total number of humans who have lived up to this point, multiply it by the probability of humanity going extinct by the year 2100, and divide the result by the combined number of humans who have lived and those simulated in a hypothetical simulation. At the end of the day, it looks like a very basic probability calculation. As we work through this calculation step by step, its simplicity will become even clearer. Now, let's calculate the probability that we are living in a simulation together while adopting a conservative approach. Here are the assumptions we'll use. Humanity has a 50% chance of going extinct by the year 2100. The total number of humans who have lived up to this point is 108 billion. and post-human civilizations are assumed to run only one simulation. Now, let's input these values into Nick Bostrom's formula, proposed in 2003, and see the result. Yes, the calculation has been completed, and using these conservative assumptions, we find that the probability of us living in a simulation is 33%. Let's break this down further. The extinction probability is 50%, the number of simulations is 1, and the total number of humans who have lived is 108 billion. Based on these assumptions, there's a 33% chance that we're in a simulation. However, let's not forget that this also means there's a 67% chance that we are not in a simulation. Theoretical calculations like this are based on intrinsic variables that are nearly impossible to predict. Therefore, it's important to emphasize just how speculative they are. When interpreting results like these, we must always remember that we're dealing with highly theoretical elements, and such findings are far from being definitively accepted by the scientific community. Moreover, calculating a single probability value is usually neither sufficient nor particularly meaningful. Instead, it makes much more sense to focus on a range of probabilities based on the possible values that the variables can take. In fact, quantum mechanics teaches us precisely this principle. From this perspective, if we vary the most influential factor in Nick Bostrom's formula, the probability of surviving until 2100, across a range from 0% to 100%, while keeping the other two variables constant, we can arrive at far more meaningful results. The graph displayed on your screen reflects the results of this calculation. As you can see, as the probability of extinction increases, the likelihood of living in a simulation decreases. However, based on our conservative assumptions, even if the extinction probability is 0%, the results still suggest a 50% chance that we are living in a simulation. But how much do these calculations and predictions actually reflect reality? Or are such endeavors merely the fantasies of theoretical scientists? The answers to these questions depend entirely on your own perception and assumptions. Our perspective, however, leans toward skepticism, mainly because we believe humanity is unlikely to choose to transition to a post-human stage. For this reason, we think the likelihood of these calculations reflecting reality is quite low. Today, we embarked on a journey filled with theory and calculations. See you in our next video.